Hello everyone, Helen here. It's lovely to have you here. Thanks for coming to join me. And maybe if you're here this week, it's because you've already watched part one of the most recent Campervan trip that Phil, my husband, and I have been on. If you haven't seen part one, it doesn't really matter which order you watch them in. But yes, I'm back this week to continue that trip. And so I'm not going to give you any more waffle at the start of today. I'll pop in again at the end to say goodbye. But yeah, let's get on. Let's get on with this trip. So when I left you last week, we'd left Durham, where we live, and travelled in a westerly direction through Weardale and the North Pennines and across to the most southwesterly region of Cumbria. We visited Walney Island, and when I left you last time, we'd just set off from our visit to the excellent Dock Museum in Barrow in Furness. Again, apologies if any of the video is a little bit shaky because my gimbal, which normally irons out all the lumps and bumps, is not working. Anyway, it was late in the afternoon when we drove from Barrow, and very soon we arrived at Furness Abbey. We passed the rather cute little hut, which was once the toll booth for entering the abbey, where you used to pay to go in. It was built in the style of a railway signal box, and that was really just as a nod to the nearby railway. The sun continued to shine down on us, and we were amazed to find that we were the only visitors at the abbey. And having the place to ourselves definitely added to the calm, tranquil atmosphere, with the sun on the red sandstone heightening its warm, welcoming colour. We wandered around the ruins, trying to absorb what an incredible feat of organisation and skill must have been needed for the abbey to be built back in the 12th century. Monks from Savigny in France came to the site in 1127 and found this secluded location that was perfect in so many ways, with easy access to timber and stone and an accessible water supply. 20 years later, the Savignac monasteries were absorbed into the strict Cistercian order, and the original building was expanded to become the series of Cistercian monastery buildings that we see today. Interestingly, the abbey was built on rather boggy ground, and in order to save the buildings from collapse, restoration work took place between 2008 and 2017, when a large iron framework had to be constructed to hold up some of the structure. During excavations to strengthen the foundations, a high-status burial was unearthed. The body of a man, possibly a former abbot or a bishop from the 14th or 15th century, had been buried along with a very beautiful copper-plated crozier, and he was wearing a ring too, although I don't have a photo of that. The monastery soon became one of the richest in England. Its proximity to the sea meant that the monks could engage in trading, and they also owned many farms and mills and tanneries and large areas of land. They developed sheep farming and a trade in wool, as well as having mineral rights over a large area, including owning a few iron mines. This all helped to boost their wealth, alongside regular contributions by rich benefactors. Not surprisingly, the abbey wasn't immune to King Henry VIII's mission to dissolve all the monasteries from 1536. Furness Abbey, after first of all trying to resist the inevitable, was actually the first of the major monasteries to be dissolved. It was almost as though it was being made an example of. All of its possessions were confiscated and went to the king, while the abbey buildings were dismantled even while the monks were still living there. By the late 1700s, Furness Abbey had become a tourist attraction, and in 1846 a railway station and a fashionable hotel were built right next to the abbey. The poet William Wordsworth, despite the fact that his guide to the Lake District encouraged visitors to visit the abbey, expressed his annoyance at these developments, which he said threatened the repose and quietness of the abbey's ruins. Wordsworth wrote a couple of poems about Furness Abbey, the first in praise of the ruins. Here where of havoc tired and rash undoing, man left this structure to become time's prey, a soothing spirit follows in the way that nature takes, her counterwork pursuing. So that's just an excerpt from a much longer poem. And a second poem about the workers that were constructing the railway, who really appreciated the peace of the abbey, unlike their bosses who just wanted to make money from the building of the railway. And this is an excerpt from that poem. Well have yon railway labourers to this ground withdrawn for noontide rest. They sit, they walk among the ruins, but no idle talk is heard. To grave demeanour all are bound, and from one voice a hymn with tuneful sound hallows once more the long deserted choir, and thrills the old sepulchral earth around. Others look up, and with fixed eyes admire that wide-spanned arch, wondering how it was raised to keep so high in air its strength and grace. All seem to feel the spirit of the place, and by the general reverence God is praised. Profane despoilers, stand ye not reproved, while thus these simple-hearted men are moved. Before settling down for the night, we went for a little drive to the nearby town of Dalton in Furness, once the main town on the Furness Peninsula, where we stopped to take a look at Dalton Castle, which is actually a peel tower, and it was built in the 14th century. It was used not only as a place of refuge for the monks of Furness Abbey on occasions where they were threatened by Scottish raiders, but also as a courthouse for the abbey. The tower contained, amongst other things, a courtroom and also a jail. Even after the dissolution of Furness Abbey in 1537, the castle continued as a courthouse for over 300 years. We enjoyed wandering round the outside of it. It wasn't open while we were there. It just seemed nestled amongst the less ancient homes and buildings of the town, and there was a lovely array of summer flowers around it too. Our chosen stopping place for the night involved returning to the abbey, where a small car park gave permission for up to 2 campervans to park overnight. We were so excited to be able to spend the night right next to the beautiful abbey in this sheltered, very green haven. I loved the statues that we looked out on in the grounds of the Abbey Mill. I especially liked the friendly kneeling monk who I decided would be our silent protector through the night. There are 3 ghostly apparitions that are reported to have been seen at the abbey. There's a grieving squire's daughter. There's a monk who was apparently decapitated as he rode to the abbey at great speed to warn the monastery about Scottish invaders. And apparently there's a monk who's been seen climbing a spiral staircase and then disappearing into a wall. But none of these ghosts came to disturb us through the night. We had another simple tea of fried egg rolls and we settled down for the night. We had such a nice, relaxed start to our Sunday morning, looking out onto our green and pleasant surroundings, although the car parks soon became quite busy because it seems to be a very popular place for dog walkers. And I don't blame them either, it is lovely there. But they came and went without disturbing the peace. As on the previous day, we didn't go rushing off into the day, and thankfully Phil had no more meetings either, as he'd had done the last couple of days. We sat there for quite some time after breakfast, just reading, or in my case, crocheting. I loved the way the sun was shining through the holes in my granny go-round jumper, almost making it glow. Oh, well, that sounds bad, doesn't it, through the holes, but hopefully you know what I mean by that, the holes that are meant to be there. Once the Abbey Mill Cafe had opened, we sat outside it with tea and toasted tea cakes, and I did a bit more crochet while watching the world go gently by. We decided to return to the Abbey before leaving the area, because we hadn't actually had time the day before to look properly in the little museum. There were some very interesting stone effigies of knights, intriguingly depicted with their legs crossed, and with a small lion curled around their feet, signifying bravery. There were lots of pieces of the Abbey's masonry on display, which might seem a bit boring unless you take the time to find out more about them. And I was particularly interested in various pieces of stonework that demonstrated how skilled the builders were in managing the use of water at the Abbey. I loved the artist's impression of what the Abbey may once have looked like. Pictures like these always help to bring a ruined building to life, and they give more meaning to the remains that we see today. In the shop, we bought ourselves a bottle of spiced mead, an excellent drink. We tested it out later that evening. Leaving the Abbey, we passed a really beautiful old house, looking absolutely picture perfect and like something from the top of an old-fashioned box of chocolates. Our next destination was to Roe Island, on the coast of the Furness Peninsula, which is reached just by crossing a causeway. It wasn't at all crowded there, despite the fine weather, and we had a nice view over the pale blue sea. Our purpose for driving there was to catch a little boat across to Peel Island to visit the castle. The castle can be seen from quite far afield, from all around Morecambe Bay, sitting on its tiny island at the southern end of the Walney Channel. I always think it's extra exciting to visit somewhere when you have to cross water to get there, and we enjoyed our little trip on quite a small boat, which I think took not much more than about 10 minutes. The sea was very calm and looking very beautiful, and it wasn't long before we were landing on the island and heading up to the castle. The castle is dominated by its massive keep, which is enclosed by both an inner and outer bailey, each surrounded by a ditch and set with corner towers. The stone used to build the castle was just taken from the beach, apparently, although red sandstone was imported for some extra architectural details. Peel Castle and Island was owned by Furness Abbey, and it was fortified by them in the first half of the 14th century. The whole of northern England was often troubled by invaders from Scotland, and the castle was needed as a place of safety for the monks to retreat to. The monks probably also wanted to monitor boats passing through Peel Harbour, to protect cargoes from the weather and from raiders and pirates, and, it's thought, to engage in a bit of smuggling. Maybe another reason why the abbey became so wealthy. The monks weren't always on the best of terms with the king, perhaps due to quarrels about trade and accusations of smuggling. And in 1487, the monks allowed Lambert Simnel, who was claiming to be the rightful heir to the throne, to land on the island with an 8,000-strong army on his way to London to claim the crown, though he was defeated and captured before he got there. In 1537, when Furness Abbey was dissolved, the castle became the property of Henry VIII, but it was just left to fall into ruins. In the 18th century, a few small houses and a pub were built on the island, and you can go to the pub while you visit the island, although they're not currently doing food. William Wordsworth, the poet, had something to say about Peel Castle, and so here's a couple of short excerpts from a poem that he wrote. I was thy neighbour once, thou rugged pile. 4 summer weeks I dwelt in sight of thee. I saw thee every day, and all the while thy form was sleeping on a glassy sea. And this huge castle standing here sublime, I love to see the look with which it braves, cased in the unfeeling armour of old time, the lightning, the fierce wind, the trampling waves. Well, there was no fierce wind or trampling waves on the day that we were there, and we had a very pleasant return boat trip across the mouth of the Walney Channel. By the time we were crossing back from Roe Island, the tide had gone right out. We drove a short distance along the coast to find somewhere to stop for lunch, and we parked with a view of a needle-like structure called Rampside Leading Light. Leading Light is apparently another name for a navigation beacon. There were once 13 beacons like this built around Barrow in the late 19th century, but this one that was built in 1875 is the only one that survives. It's about 20 metres tall, that's 66 feet, and it's made from red and yellow bricks. The next place of interest that we wanted to visit was at the northern edge of the Furness Peninsula, near Broughton in Furness. This was a bit of industrial archaeology, and it was a kind of a link with some of the things we'd learned at the Dock Museum in Barrow. Duddon Iron Furnace was in use from 1736 for about 130 years, and this site is apparently the most complete example of a charcoal-fired blast furnace. The ironworks were built here not only because of the local reserves of iron ore, but also, just as importantly, because charcoal was readily available. That's the fuel that was used in the smelting process. Huge bellows pumped air into the combustion chamber, and that was driven by a water wheel, which is no longer there, but the channel where it would have been is still there. The smelted iron flowed out of the bottom of the chamber into little moulds called pigs, so called because they resembled a litter of suckling pigs, and so that's where the term pig iron comes from. The iron from Duddon was sent as far afield as Bristol, where it was used in the manufacture of anchors and chains and other ironwork for ships. We found a very picturesque spot to park in for the night, in a little sheltered valley by a wide stream, which seemed to be quite a popular place for day trippers. And on a hot day, it's a great place for playing about in the cool water of the stream. We put the roof of the van up. We don't always have the roof up overnight, if we maybe want to be a bit more incognito, or if it's cold and we want to preserve the heat inside the van. But the weather was beautiful, and the only minor problem was solved with the application of some midgie repellent. I am very tasty to all biting insects. I made us a quick mushroom and corn risotto, which ended up looking rather grey and unappetising, although it tasted okay. But a note to myself is I must try making some more colourful meals in the campervan. They often end up looking a bit grey. Phil got the Kelly kettle out to make tea, and once the day trippers had gone home, we really enjoyed the peaceful scene. The sheep around us, some of which I think might have been Herdwick's, although I'm not so sure about the ewe with her little black lamb. And we heard the sound of a cuckoo, which was lovely. It was almost drowned out by the rushing water of the nearby stream, though hopefully you can just about hear him. The sun was up early again the next day, and we were treated to yet another day of blue sky and warm sunshine. We set off quite early and had a very enjoyable half-hour drive to get to the place we wanted to visit that morning. It took us over hills with wonderful views and some shady tunnels of trees, and as so often happens, we were meeting some sheep along the way. All of these seemed to have been recently sheared. They were very relaxed about being on the road, though we were travelling on very quiet roads where the sheep definitely have the right of way. After a little bit of uncertainty, we eventually found the place to start our walk to see Swinside Stone Circle. It took us half an hour or so to walk along the track, which was mostly uphill, taking us in the direction of Swinside Fell. I paused, as always, to chat to some nice sheepy friends along the way, some of them more curious about us than others. And we paused again a little further on to listen to the sound of a skylark high above us. We did begin to wonder if we were on the right path, because it was ages before we saw any signs of a stone circle. But eventually I spotted it in the distance, and we were very glad that we'd made the effort to walk there. Swinside Stone Circle is one of around 1,300 recorded stone circles in the British Isles and Brittany that were first constructed over 5,000 years ago in the late Neolithic and the early Bronze Ages. In this area of Britain, in the Lake District, it was a particularly busy time for stone circle construction. Yet no one really knows why they were built. Archaeologists can only make a guess that perhaps they were used for ceremonial purposes. This particular circle was made from local slate, and the 55 stones form a circle that's nearly 27 metres, that's just over 93 feet, in diameter. Originally it's thought that there was a total of 60 stones. An entrance has been identified on the southeastern side of the circle, where there are 2 outer portal stones. I can understand why a Neolithic man might have chosen this place to build their circle of stone, on a flat plain nestled by hills, where any ancient travellers coming down from the hills would have easily spotted the unusual feature in the landscape that was otherwise fairly empty. Back on the road, we headed for the town of Ulverston, where we paused to have a look round. First of all, we called in at a lovely little cafe called Poppy's, and we had an extremely delicious brunch of poached egg, cheese and bacon on a rusty. That's something made of grated potato. We both finished with completely clean plates. We wandered around the town centre, admiring the varied selection of independent shops. I loved the quote above this dress shop. There were all sorts of temptations, including in the market hall, but I even resisted buying something from the haberdashery stall in there. But we'd certainly be happy to make a return visit to the town. It has quite a variety of interesting buildings. The thing that Ulverston is probably most famous for is that it was the birthplace of Stan Laurel, of Laurel and Hardy fame. So we thought we'd take a look at the statue outside the theatre. Stan was born very close to the town centre in 1890, and he lived here for the first 6 years of his life before moving to Bishop Auckland, which is just south of Durham, where I live. Though he always returned to Ulverston to stay with his grandparents in the school holidays. Apparently, Laurel and Hardy once appeared on the balcony of the theatre here to wave to the crowd who'd come to see them. It's a fine statue, and it's surrounded by some famous Laurel and Hardy quotes that are engraved into the paving stones in front of the theatre. We headed out of Ulverston after that because it was time to travel home. Driving out of the town, we saw another monument, this time to a less famous local called John Barrow, and we paused to take a quick look at the Ulverston Canal, which is claimed to be the deepest, straightest and shortest canal in the UK. We travelled north a little way on the motorway and then on the main road across the Pennines. As we passed through the area surrounding the town of Appleby, we were surprised to see all the grass verges filled with horses and caravans, and that's because it was almost time for the Appleby Horse Fair, a large gathering of gypsies and travellers who come from far and wide each year to meet up and buy and sell horses and generally have some fun together. And I hope that you have had a bit of fun travelling with us today, and and I look forward to taking you on more campervan trips. We've got more planned, and yes, I hope you'll come back and join us for those. But that's it for today. So until then, take good care of yourself, keep nice and busy, and I will be back very soon. Okay then, bye.